Good evening. Welcome to the American Antiquarian Society for this evening's public program. We're joining you this evening from the unceded ancestral lands of the Nipmuc tribal community, who remain a very vibrant presence here in central Massachusetts. My name is Nan Wolverton, Director of Fellowships at the Society, where I also direct the Center for Historic American Visual Culture. Our program this evening is titled Mouth and Toes, the World of 19th Century Silhouette Artists with Disabilities, a collaborative project with Laurel, Daen, and Marianne, Petit. I'm also joined this evening by Kayla Hopper, who is our Director of Outreach. I know there are some in the audience today who are joining us for the first time, so I'm just going to give a brief introduction to the Society. The American Antiquarian Society is a national research library and a learned society in Worcester, Massachusetts. We are devoted to exploring, understanding, and sharing America's and Americans' diverse stories pre-20th century. As a library, we collect, preserve, and share the printed record of what is now the United States, portions of Canada, and the Caribbean, and we seek to collect and preserve for research one copy of everything that was printed in these areas pre-1900. Our collections include books, pamphlets, broadsides, children's literature, newspapers and periodicals, manuscripts, sheet music, and graphic arts materials such as prints, maps, photographs, and silhouettes such as those that you will see this evening. Our holdings include over 200 silhouette profile portraits, and they've all been digitized, so if you'd like to see them on your website, you're welcome to do that. Before I introduce our speakers, I'd like to ask my colleague, Kayla Hopper, to share with you some of the logistics of the Zoom webinar format that we're using this evening. Kayla?
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. Just a few notes about how we'll be using Zoom webinar tonight. For the Q&A portion of the program, at the end of the program, we'll be using the dedicated Q&A function, not the chat box. By using the Q&A function, we'll better be able to keep track of questions. It also has an upvote function. So if someone poses a question you want to see discussed, be sure to upvote it to help get it to the top of the queue. You can place your questions into the Q&A function at any point during the program, and then we'll start to ask them towards the end. Due to the large number of attendees, the chat box is only going to be used for informational purposes. Throughout the program, I'll post relevant links and information there. I just posted one to an illustrated inventory of our silhouette collection, for example. And you can contact us as presenters if there's any technical difficulties that we should know about. If you'd like to save the chat to retain links for future use, you can save a transcription of it by clicking on the 3 dots in the chat window. Closed captioning is also available as an option for tonight's program. We'll be using Zoom's live transcription function. You can turn the closed captioning on and off by clicking the button labeled CC. Finally, we are recording the program and we'll make it available on our website and YouTube channel for viewing later. Thanks, Nan.
Great, thank you so much, Kayla. Now I'm pleased to introduce our 2 speakers. Laurel Daen is Assistant Professor of American Studies at the University of Notre Dame. Her research and teaching focus on disability, sickness, medicine, and health in America, primarily during the 18th and 19th centuries. She is currently completing her first book, which examines disability and civil rights around the time of the American Revolution. Daen's work has appeared in the Journal of Social History, Early American Literature, History Compass, and the Journal of the Early Republic. Her article in the latter publication focused on Martha Ann Honeywell, one of the subjects of Mouth and Toes, and it won the Outstanding Article Award from the Disability History Association in 2018. Marianne Petit is an artist and educator whose work explores fairy tales, anatomical obsessions, graphic and narrative medicine, as well as collective storytelling practices through mechanical books that combine animation and papercraft. Petit's artwork has appeared internationally in festivals and exhibitions, been featured in publications such as Hyperallergic, Make, and Wired, and broadcast on IFC and PBS. Her movable books can be found in numerous museum and library collections. She is an associate artist professor at New York University's IMA ITP programs. That's Interactive Media Arts and Interactive Telecommunications program, both of which are located in the Tisch School of Arts. Additionally, Petit serves as an Associate Vice Chancellor for Global Network Academic Planning for the university and received the university's Distinguished Teaching Award in 2016. Marianne was also a J. and Deborah Last Creative and Performing Artists writer fellow here at AAS. This was back in the summer of 2020. And given the timing, that was a virtual fellowship because of the pandemic, but Marianne made great use of our digitized collections for research. The Creative Artist Program was begun here in 1995, and you can go to our website to learn more about this program and the artists that we have welcomed here over the past 25 years. We continue to welcome visual artists, fiction writers, nonfiction writers, poets, playwrights, performance artists, musicians, and composers, as well as film and media makers, all of whom are seeking to create original works based on American history to present to non-academic audiences and readers. I urge you to visit our website to learn more about these one-month fellowships if you're interested. Applications are due in early October. I'm now going to turn things over to our speakers who will talk to us about their project, Mouth and Toes. So Laurel and Marianne, please go ahead.
Great. Marianne, do you want to share our screen?
Will do.
Okay, great.
Hold on. Oops. Apologies. Okay, here we go.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Nan, and really thank you to everyone at the American Antiquarian Society for supporting this project in so many ways, not only Marianne's last Creative Artist Fellowship, but as we go today, you'll see many, many reproductions of works held in the American Antiquarian Society in our piece and in the virtual galleries, which we'll introduce to you. So we are incredibly grateful and thankful and really humbled by the work that you all do. So before we get into the meat of the program, I'll make a brief note about accessibility. Accessibility is always a really crucial goal, but when we're talking about disability and disability history, it's a moment to be really intentional and explicit about some of the choices that we're making and the ways that we're interacting. So to that end, as Kayla mentioned, there is closed captioning available for this talk. And if you haven't turned it on already, you're welcome to click the CC at the bottom of the screen. The talk is also being recorded, as was mentioned. So if you just step aside or step away, you'll be able to kind of catch up on what you missed when you come back. As well, Marianne and I will do our absolute best today to speak slowly and clearly in plain language. To give you sort of an agenda and some of the big ideas of the talk right up front, to use a large font size and high contrast color scheme in our visuals, and to describe those visuals as we go. If there's anything that we can do to increase your understanding or access throughout the program, please just put a note in that Q&A. As part of being inclusive, I also do want to mention some potentially sensitive and disturbing material that's to come. We'll be talking today about the objectification of disability, audience members oogling at these artists' bodies, using negative stereotypes about disability to contextualize them. We'll also be looking and thinking about intersections between the performance of disability and the performance of race. And there's a particular image towards the end where you'll see one of the artists we're talking about performing alongside a sort of minstrel type entertainment. So please know that that's to come, and you're welcome to adjust your participation accordingly. Okay, and now to tell you a bit about what's in store for you this evening. Marianne will start us off by telling us a bit about what Mouth and Toes is, this creative art project that we've collaborated on. Then we'll both step back and tell you how we came to this project, about our interests in art and history, and about the real benefits of collaborative work. And then at the end, we'll get right back in to Mouth and Toes and really give you some visuals of the work, as well as the ebook and the virtual galleries that support the physical piece. Along the way, you'll get a good sense of the artist's stories and artwork that we profile in the work, And those three main artists are Martha Ann Honeywell, Sarah Rogers, and Saunders Ken Grems Nellis. Okay, Marianne, do you want to tell us a bit about Mouth and Toes?
Sure. And I'd also just like to say thank you to Nan and Kayla and everyone at the American Antiquarian Society. This has just been an extraordinary experience, and thank you. So I'll start by playing a video. This is actually of an installation of a solo exhibition I had at the Northwest Arts Center at Minot State University last April. And where Laurel and I debuted Mouth and Toes. Neither one of us was able to attend because of COVID, but as you see, the camera is panning across the piece, and it consists of 2 cardboard crankies or moving panoramas, large format accordion books that tell the story of the 3 artists in question, as well as Moses Williams and the Peel Museum. And there's also some handheld flip books that depict artists in action, as well as screens that show artists in action in animated form. And so this video was shot right before the opening event. So you can see I attended through Zoom, and the director of the museum, the gallery is there, and the audience came shortly afterwards. We can look at this video more at length later. Okay, so I'll pass it back to you, Laurel. And you're muted.
Okay, so I'll start by talking a little bit about how I came to the work of Martha Ann Honeywell, who really kind of sparked my research in this area. And it was during one of the first days in graduate school, and I was a graduate student in history at the College of William and Mary. And I was working as an apprentice in the Prints, Maps, and Paintings collection at Colonial Williamsburg. And I came across just one afternoon, the most beautiful piece of artwork, and that is one of the piece that you see right before you. So let me tell you a little bit about what you're looking at here. The whole work is about 8 inches in diameter. At the center are the words and letters of the Lord's Prayer, cut out of cream-colored paper. And encased in an 8-pointed star, a really intricately detailed 8-pointed star. And in each of those points, you'll see a blooming potted plant. So this cream-colored cutting is pasted onto black paper for display, and then onto another cream-colored paper, which is pin-pricked. So you'll see this silk floral embroidery around the edge, and it's on pin-prick paper. So tiny, tiny little pinpricks there to give texture. And then there's this floral silk embroidery in a 4-pointed star, again surrounded by more cut work around the edges. So there's 4 more blooming potted plants pasted onto turquoise paper, and then 8 dark green sort of tree-like sprigs decorated around the edge. So this whole work, again, is only 8 inches in diameter, and it is pasted onto a green silk mat, and is really just incredibly intricate and amazingly detailed. So in any case, I was really captivated by this work, and I soon learned it was by this artist, Martha Ann Honeywell. But at the time I discovered this piece, there really was very little written about Honeywell. There's mentions here and there. So I ended up doing a lot of primary research to kind of uncover her story. Sorry. So in any case, I did a lot of work in newspaper advertisements, and as well as tracing her artwork. And I learned that she was born in 1786, passed away in 1856, and spent 60 years on the road, traveling and performing all around the expanding United States, and in more than 6 countries around the world. So England, Ireland, France, Germany, Switzerland, and Canada. She created art, such as what you see before you, and she also performed her unusual body for customers. Honeywell was born without arms and hands, and with only 1 foot, with 3 toes. So she created this work as well as many other works using her mouth, her toes, and the short arm that extended about partway between her shoulder and would-be elbow. Amazingly, for a woman during this period, as well as for a woman with significant physical disabilities, she worked and toured by herself. She was accompanied by her mother for her first decade of life, but then she really worked independently, controlled, had full artistic control, and also control over her finances and profits. So, Marianne, you want to go to the next slide? Yeah, and so in any case, I tracked Honeywell's newspaper advertisements around, able to trace her travels. There's a broadside you see on the left of the screen, published in Baltimore in 1840 or around 1840. On the right of the scene, you'll see two silhouettes that Honeywell made of a currently unidentified woman and man. Honeywell would create these silhouettes in seconds and charge about 25 cents for them. So by tracking kind of these two, art advertisements and her actual creative work, I was able to kind of uncover her story and her travels. We'll go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Yes, here's a world map just so you can be reminded about really the extensiveness of her travels. She went from Maine to Georgia, to Missouri, to Ohio and Toronto, and then all the way again to Dublin, London, and all throughout Germany and Switzerland and France. I will say there's still more research to be done. There's still, there's a lot to learn about her time in Europe that I'm still working to do. So this is sort of an ongoing story as well. Marianne, next. Great. And so it was actually through my research on Honeywell that I discovered the other two artists that we feature in Mouth and Toes. These are artists that Honeywell sometimes performed with or overlapped with or traveled alongside. So Sarah Rogers was about Honeywell's age, born in 1789 in Leominster, New Hampshire. She probably began drawing and paper cutting at a young age, but was discovered by a local newspaper editor in 1806. He published a text called A Real Object of Charity, held at the American Antiquarian Society. And in it featured many of her drawings, such as the one you see on the right hand part of your screen. These two really cute little birds, one of which is eating trying to eat a bee. And as you see, it says drawn by Sally Rogers without the use of her hands. Rogers was born without the use of her arms, hands, and legs, and she drew, painted, and made paper cuttings, including silhouettes, with her mouth. So the Object of Charity kind of launched Rogers' career. She toured throughout the United States, showcasing her artistic abilities and physical disabilities. In 1808, her and Honeywell met each other in Charleston, in South Carolina. They decided to tour for a short time together. And on the left of the screen, you'll see them, their advertisement in Savannah, Georgia. They styled themselves the Curious Young Ladies and charge $1 for admission there. Marianne, go to the next slide. Thanks. So here are, perfect. Yeah, so here are two more watercolors by Rogers, which are also featured in A Real Object of Charity. So on the left, you'll see this really sort of gorgeous depiction of a tree stump with a cute orange and blue songbird kind of eyeing these three mice below. And on the right is this sort of delicate green thistle with this bright shock of red at the top. And again, both watercolors are captioned drawn by Sally Rogers. Okay, Marianne, we'll go to the next one. Perfect. And I'll introduce you to the second artist that I encountered in my research and that we feature in Mouth and Toes, Saunders Ken Grems Nellis. And he was born in 1817 in New York. He got his start performing in Baltimore at the Maryland Museum. Honeywell was performing across town at this time. So I don't actually know for sure that they met, but they were both performing in Baltimore during this period. As you can see on the left, Nellis's novel exhibition broadside, he was born without arms, and he created amazing paper cutting as well as a variety of different artwork, visual artwork, and did a variety of kind of performative acts with his mouth as well as his toes. Marianne, will you go to the next slide? Perfect. So Nellis was a master paper cutter. Actually, very few of his artworks survive, but this is sort of an incredibly detailed one that does. At the center, you'll see a 16-pointed star cut out of black paper, filled with depictions of people, of plants, of exotic animals, lions, elephants, various kinds of birds. On the around, you'll see it flanked with birds, floral images, angels above, and then below it says sort of a banner that reads for S.G. Tripp Esquire, Providence, Rhode Island, by S.K.G. Nellis, born without arms, New York. And then at the bottom, there is sort of another paper cutting featuring a hunting scene and a horse and carriage. Great. So Nellis created not only this really remarkable cut work, but actually did a lot of performances during his shows too, especially talents in music and dance. And I really love this image here, probably created in the 1850s. You can see him standing front and center in his performance costume. In the foreground are various props he would use for his shows. So the cello, drum, triangle, bow and arrow, a gun that he would fire. And then behind him are images of Nellis, the artist, performing these various skills. So winding a watch, shooting a bow and arrow, playing the cello or the triangle or the drums. You can get a sense of the variety of entertainment that audience members would go when they would see Nellis. Like Honeywell and Rogers, Nellis toured widely, even more widely than the other two, and he was very active across South America and the Caribbean, as far west as California, as in the United States, as far south as Louisiana, and all throughout Europe. So he was an extensive traveler and performed for many years around the globe. So in any case, I learned about these various artists. I became captivated by a couple of things. So one, this confluence of artistic ability and physical disability that they showcase to customers, right? So using the sort of uniqueness of their bodies, as well as the uniqueness of their capabilities, their artistic capabilities, they captivated patrons, drew them to their shows. And really turned a profit, right? So these artists all retained creative control over their artistic productions, their exhibitions, and they also retained financial control, right? They, in many ways, kind of use their patrons' curiosities and their prejudices, especially about disability, and then turned them and were able to kind of turn a profit and make a career in this way. So Marianne, I'll maybe turn it over to you and tell you, have you say a little bit about, how we how we met. Oh yeah. So anyway, I did some work on this and I wrote an article, and then I stepped away and did some other research. And then thankfully Marianne brought me back in last summer.
Great. Thank you. And I owe you an apology by the surprise audiovisual control that my cat did. It was a little unexpected. So very quickly, just to give a little sense of where I was coming from, as Nan said, I teach in the Interactive Media Arts and Interactive Telecommunications programs at the Tisch School of the Arts. In 2013, I moved to Shanghai to China to help co-launch the undergraduate version, the Interactive Media Arts program there. With Professor Matthew Belanger. At the same time, too, I was working with a colleague who may be on the call, Anita Purr. We'd been teaching courses around assistive technology development, and we, along with Professor Luc Dubois, co-founded the NYU Ability Project, which is now directed by Professor Amy Hurst, who may also be on the call. I say all of this because it figures into the piece. But my primary identification is as an artist, and I work in paper craft, and my interests are in paper craft and animation. And storytelling. So these are spreads from a pop-up book I did based on Heinrich Hoffmann's Struwwelpeter. If you've ever read it, it's cautionary tales for children in which children's misbehavior meets dire consequences. And there is an app that accompanies the book so that you can hold your phone onto any page and it launches an animated version of that. I also am interested in the body and as well as papercraft. This is a series I did around respiration. The earliest movable books were not children's books that create marvel in their storytelling capacities, but they were actually tools for adults. Volvels that gave scientific information, anatomical flat books that told us about the body. And so this is a series I did around the respiratory system and also includes animation that is projected onto a pop-up book that is placed inside an installation environment. Let me move forward. And then the last thing I'd like to talk about, again, because it figures into this, is I've had a long-standing relationship, both as a volunteer and as a board member to the Adaptive Design Association, which was founded by Alex Truesdell, who received the MacArthur Award in 2015. She actually may be here as well. The Adaptive Design Association builds custom adaptations for children with disabilities from readily available materials, in this case, cardboard. And that also figures heavily into the work that was produced. So how I came to this topic, in 2013, I just moved to China and I was researching for a course I was about to teach in paper art that was a history and survey of paper folding, paper cutting, paper engineering all over the world. And I stumbled across the paper cut on the left. It says "Cut Without Hands" by M.A. Honeywell. And I was completely intrigued and thought, oh my goodness, I need to investigate this further. But I was overwhelmed because I had just moved to China. So I thought I'll put this on the back burner until I have time. And that opportunity came in 2019 when I applied to the American Antiquarian Society for a fellowship, in large part because the Silhouette collection is extraordinary and they do have works by Marianne Honeywell there. Because of COVID, my dreams of being in the archive and holding these pieces did not actually manifest. I did a residency from a one-bedroom apartment in Beacon, New York, with my boyfriend and 3 cats. But I have to thank everyone at the Antiquarian Society. It was just a remarkable experience. Elizabeth made instructional videos so I could get into the databases. Amy spent, an hour in a one-on-one session showing me how to locate things in the archives. Lauren sent me things that they thought might be of interest in terms of my research. And Daen was constantly updating me and checking in, and I did feel like I was part of a community. So I immediately started looking through the archives and finding all the different advertisements of Marianne Honeywell's performances, which then also led me to the Object of Charity and Sarah Rogers' work, both in the archive as well as her collaboration with Marianne Honeywell. In addition, I also found in the advertisements as well the work of Saunders Nellis. And at this point, the pause between 2013 and 2020 was very fortuitous for me because that's when I discovered Laurel's work as well. And it was really instrumental in terms of giving me a sense of who these artists were and how they navigated their careers, their work as artists, the landscape around new technologies, the railway, the press, and the very delicate sort of balance, especially Marianne Honeywell had in terms of her presentation, of her work as an artist, as an entrepreneur and businesswoman, very extraordinary person. So this collaboration formed because I wrote Laurel a thank you email, and she was so gracious in her response that we decided to work together in developing this piece, and I'm very grateful for that. Additionally, in the context of my research, I really started to get a sense of the role of the Peel Museum and how the Peel Museum centered into the performances and the presentation of all of these artists in terms of their residencies at these locations. It also brought me to the work of Moses Williams. Moses Williams had been formerly enslaved by Peel. His parents had been emancipated when he was a child. He was raised in the Peel household alongside the Peel children, and was trained in some of the arts, but not in all of the arts. He was not trained as an oil painter as Raphael and the other Peel children had been, but he had been trained on the Physionotrace and he became the resident paper cutter and silhouette portrait cutter at the Peel Museum. And in his first year, he cut approximately 900 portraits and was emancipated 1 year early and was married to the woman who served as the cook in the Peel household and purchased a 3-story brick building. In finding this, I actually made a post to social media, and a friend who was an archivist introduced me to Ellen Sacco, who wrote some remarkable work on Moses Williams, and it's very worth investigating. And so we decided to include Moses Williams in this collection, in particular because in June 2020, the country was taking to the streets to protest the murder of George Floyd, and this seemed like a really important piece of information of our history that had to be recognized in the context of this work. Here are some illustrations and a photo of a recreated Physionotrace. And in large part because as I was going through the archives and I was finding these advertisements for Martha Ann Honeywell and Sarah Rogers and Saunders Nellis, I was simultaneously finding in the same page and the same publication advertisements for rewards for runaway slaves. And it seemed that the stories present on the same page needed to be held in the context of looking at this history now and the stories of these individuals. And this is another piece. Laurel, do you want to speak at all about this? I know that you gave a mention of it at the beginning, and it is in the
Oh, that's okay. It's just that, it's striking the kind of performances of disability that we see on the top and then the performance of race at the bottom, right? And so in Mouth and Toes, we really look at the ways that disability in some ways sort of mirrors race, or there's ways that these two identity categories are intersecting, both in terms of exploitation, but also in terms of not necessarily in this context, but in terms of the way that some artists are able to kind of use it as an advantage, maybe more in terms of Moses Williams than in this context. But this piece really crystallizes it, and the ways that we're able to see disability being performed in the same way that we're able to see race being performed. So that's all. Yeah.
So additionally, in the context of the fellowship, I started to think about outputs for the book. I knew that I wanted there to be an electronic book, but I also wanted there to be a paper book of some kind. I was thinking of some kind of hybrid movable book, but then it seemed important to make something that was of the time as well, at which point my partner had suggested that I take a look at the contemporary Cranky movement, which I knew nothing about, but it's an extraordinary movement of artists who create incredible storytelling and generally accompanying music, often in the form of moving panoramas. And so I began to look at moving panoramas as structures, looking at tutorials on how to make crankies, and then also looking at, you can see on the right-hand side, this is an image actually from the collection of stories told and books from the 19th century told through silhouette as well. And so that really helped inform the layout of the book. So you can see on the left-hand side, there's the moving panorama. On the back is the inside of a Cranky. I think it's from the Cranky Factory website, which is definitely worth looking at. And then the book. And simultaneously, I was thinking again of animation and what might be useful ways in which animation could be told, both electronically, but also in a physical form. And thinking again of, at the time, I started to look at mutoscopes and just what might flip books be like. And so within that, I began to illustrate artists, and I'll come to that. So we had the exhibition in April where we launched Mouth and Toes at Minot State University. Because it was COVID, I did not have access to a shop of any kind or any power tools. And so I thought, well, it makes sense for all of the work to be paper-based. And so using my cardboard carpentry skills from working with the Adaptive Design Association, I built 2 cardboard Crankies in my kitchen with an X-Acto knife and hot glue. And so the entire exhibition was made this way. And so these pieces were designed to be interactive. You can see I'm scrolling through it kind of quickly just to give the sense of the mechanism itself. I will stop. We will look at the ebook momentarily so you can read Laurel's amazing text as well. But this is, and there are two of them in two parts that tell the story. Okay, and then I created animations of how artists who work with their mouth and their feet might paint, might cut, use scissors, might do other types of things like in the lower right-hand corner, threading a needle. So I wanted to create a sense visually of how artists might work with their mouth and with their toes, and how these artists did, and how artists today still do work. Oops, excuse me, it's taking me a second to go to the next slide. There we go. And so I thought, again, these should be interactive pieces that someone could interact with, and found online a company called Flipbook Kit that makes kits that you can buy also in cardboard, and you can upload all your images and then print them out. And so you can build handheld flipbooks that could be spun at any speed you want to advance. And so these animations are about between 12 and 24 frames that sort of loop in terms of the artist in action. Okay, and so now we'll return back to the exhibition. And let me just take a look at the time. And so it was part of the whole show here, but you can see now when we pan to the wall, you can see the two moving panoramas. There are 4 flip books and 4 large accordion books that viewers can read the whole story, plus the animations on the screen as well. So what I'd like to do now is actually play a video of the ebook, and it's going to play slowly, so you have some time to read Laurel's text as well. So we'll advance a few pages and you can take a look at that, and then we'll go to the artists. I'll full screen this. And so this is our page that tells, describes what the book is about, who it's about, our introduction, and also links to the website itself. We created virtual galleries, which we'll take a look at momentarily, and Laurel has assembled a remarkable collection of items. I don't think I've ever seen a repository quite like this. And taking advantage of the electronic book format, we were also able to include the animations as well. And so now I'll pause it here for a moment so you can read some of the text of the book in action. And the book is available on our website. It's available in both EPUB format and interactive PDF format. We found that the interactive PDF format works better in Windows than the EPUB does. Their book is accessible. Alternative descriptions, text descriptions have been placed for all the images, and it should work in any screen reader. If you do download the book and are using a screen reader, and if you encounter any technical difficulties, or if there's anything that isn't working, please let us know. I tested it and it seemed to be working, but there's no accounting for bugs people find in other forms and with other tools. And so we definitely want to make sure it works on all platforms for everybody. Okay, and now looking at the time, should we go to the virtual galleries? Okay, so Laurel, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. Right. So we have the physical creative piece, and then we have the ebook that is a reproduction of the Cranky that Marianne introduced you to before. And then we thought, these artists are so underappreciated. Their work is so incredible. Let's pull together a virtual exhibition of works that they've done. And so we've done 4 virtual galleries. And we've titled them what these artists often titled their own exhibitions. So for example, Martha Ann Honeywell's splendid gallery of cutting and needlework, which she advertised widely all over. And then we have 3 for Honeywell, Rogers, and Nellis. And then we did one for Charles Wilson Peele and Moses Williams as well. And so please go to the website and view them. There's probably about 10 to 12 different images in there, brought together from a whole host of archives and libraries and museums and galleries around the world, really. We hope you enjoy them, and we see them as a real, a way to support the physical work, to promote the work of these artists, so that you can, see their incredible pieces.
Maybe should I show one of them in action?
Sure.
Do you think?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay. Which one should we show?
Oh, doesn't matter. Yeah. Perfect.
I'll go for Martha. Okay. And so if you click on any of them, you can see high res reproductions of the work captioned below at the bottom. Also, there are alternate text descriptions as well for the work.
And some of these you'll see featured in our PowerPoint today. So these were the unidentified sitters that I showed you earlier. So.
And in addition to the work, also I found Laurel did an extraordinary job of finding. I'm going to go actually back to the virtual galleries for a moment, because this was very exciting for me to see. Watercolor kit of the artist at the time, possible tools as well.
Awesome.
Great. Okay, I think that is it. So I'll stop sharing my screen.
Yeah, and so we welcome questions and comments and anything anyone wants to share.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. These are really fascinating stories that you've uncovered. And I love the way you two have collaborated on this fantastic project and the variety of resources that you've used to pull it together. It's really, really quite wonderful. We have some questions that we'll get to. I wanted to just start things off by asking you to what degree, I know this would actually pertain mainly to the female artists that you've looked at, but I'm wondering about the degree to which the disabilities of the artists, again, particularly for the women, helped to justify their labor and their profit in the marketplace, particularly in this period for women traveling and performing.
Yeah, absolutely. I can speak to that. So, right. So this is incredibly kind of dangerous work, right? Like this is not something that women were expected or really welcome to do during this period. Travel widely, independently, earn a profit, perform their bodies in public, right? This is something that's really quite striking and unusual. I do think exactly as you suggested, that their physical incapacities sort of made this seem a little bit more acceptable in a way, or at least it released them from some gender norms that they might otherwise have been held to. And I think this is really striking too, because I guess I didn't talk a lot about customer reception of these artists, but they're widely loved. And there's a couple occasional mocking advertisements, I suppose, mocking the body parts that they don't have, or for example, but this is the amount of positive reaction is really striking, is amazing. And so to have a woman, right, traveling widely, performing her body in public, and then receiving this really positive reaction is is quite amazing. And I do think that there's a way that, Honeywell was, for example, or Rogers were performing their uniqueness, but then customers often said that, they are uniquely American, they are uniquely, perfect, whole in all these really interesting ways. And I do think that there was a way that their disabilities kind of released them from these norms that were otherwise constraining, and allowed them to have these careers they wouldn't have otherwise. Allowed customers to see them as perfectly American, right? Completely whole. And there's sort of a lot going on there, but absolutely, in short.
Yeah. And Marianne or Martha Ann, I should say, was able to make a good living in this way.
Absolutely. I mean, it's hard. I have her will, but otherwise I don't really have too much exactly, but yes, worked in Toward for 60 years. So, yeah.
Great. Well, I will get to some questions here because we have some great ones, and I want to make sure we have time for those. So Jan is asking about Sarah Rogers, who died very young, and she's wondering what happened to her.
Yeah, great question. I would like to know too. So we have her death certificate or death record. It lists decay as the cause, and I don't quite know what that means. She passed away in Philadelphia. She at that point, she actually received kind of a lot of acclaim towards the end of her life. She was featured twice in Peel's Society of Artists exhibitions, annual exhibitions of her work. Unfortunately, we don't have those surviving pieces, but we can have little captions of what she did display in those exhibitions. And then she passes away the following year in 1813. She's living at that point, the mayor of Philadelphia is a benefactor of hers, and she sort of hosts exhibitions in his house, and he also kind of supports her work financially. And she passed away at his house, and there was we have a advertisement or a death notice in the newspaper, as sort of a small funeral, but otherwise, I don't know much beyond that.
Okay, thank you. This is a great question about tools, and this is maybe we can get a little bit more into process, but Riva asks, were the tools adapted to the performers' bodies?
Marianne, do you want to
We're both muted. I'm not sure of, to be perfectly honest with you. So we went with imagery of artists as they work today in terms of using standard tools that they adapt to their own bodies in terms of usage. Laurel described, it's pretty much thought that she held her scissors in her mouth and supported work with her arm to some degree, but I don't know to what degree she also used her feet in that process as well. And so when we were illustrating it, we tried to imagine as much as possible, but Laurel, do you know of specific ways in which she might have used it that we didn't capture at all? I know that you're continuously uncovering new information about her.
Yeah, no, so I guess, so I don't know of any particular adaptive tools, although how amazing would that be? I do know that Nellis's, he had a special set of, he called them very expensive, costly instruments that were made for him specifically while he was in France. And he does advertise that in some of his shows. So I don't know much beyond that in terms of whether they're specifically adapted for him. But although if he commissioned them personally, then they certainly were. I just don't know in what ways. But I really love that question, and I'll have to think about it too as I kind of go back to this work.
Yeah, it's a great question. Jacqueline is asking, what type of relationship did artists and performers like those that you discussed have to the freak show and the performers involved with those? And would these artists have been featured in something like that, or would it have been these have been completely separate worlds?
Marianne, do you want to?
No, Laurel, you can go ahead.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Great question. So in short, I see these artists' performances as sort of a precursor to quote the freak show later. You have more of an institutionalization of the entertainment industry in the mid 19th century, where you have Barnum's Museum. And so Nellis, for example, does he's sort of chronologically later than the other two, well, overlaps with Honeywell, but, worked in toward a lot in the 1840s and 50s. And he will straddle performing, say, at Barnum's Museum and then performing independently. Honeywell really retains independence almost exclusively. She performs at the Peel Museum, but almost exclusively outside of East Coast cities. She's always performing in her own galleries. So this is sort of like an early period. And then there's we see, and we do trace this in the work, of a progression towards more institutionalization, more financial and creative control exerted by showmen and museum managers. And particularly that's where we talked a bit about that. You have, suddenly minstrel shows alongside these performers, right? So you have this ways that it becomes very sort of objectified, and these artists have less autonomy. So yes, there's this kind of like an early period, and then we see this kind of gradual development of museums towards the mid 19th century.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. This is a question that came in early from Virginia's Hall. Do you have any idea why Honeywell used the name Martha Bagwell during her English trip in 1816 to 18?
Yeah, sorry, I feel like I keep. Do you want to talk, Marianne?
No.
Okay.
This is your research. This is an exciting question.
Great question, because this is actually really new information to me. I got an email from Deb Hall, who was formerly at the Hood Museum at Dartmouth a year ago now, and suggesting, why is Honeywell? It's actually Martha Bagshaw. And I learned through her note, and then also through additional research, that Honeywell did have I knew that she had been proposed to by a man who placed a ring on her toes while she was performing in Dublin. And it turned out that was not sensational news, but that was real. And she was married to a showman named William Bagshaw. And they had a young child between them. I anticipate that William Bagshaw and the child passed away, but this is ongoing research. I don't fully know. Honeywell returned to the United States in 1827. She called herself Miss Honeywell throughout her whole life. But yes, she was married and there are some pieces signed Martha Bagshaw, and particularly in England and in Europe. So this is ongoing stuff, but it was a really exciting find.
Great, thank you. Susan Strickler is asking if they refer to their work as performance, or if that is a word choice that you have used.
Oh, Laurel, I thought you were going to speak. No,
okay. No, you were welcome to this. I think that's a little bit of Marianne, have you seen that one? I think it's a little bit of our prescribed word. Is that, do you think so?
Yeah. I mean, I think that was part of my proposal, because in my research, I was looking at the fact that they did use their bodies in ways in which satisfied the audience impulse to understand their body at work. But this is, again, going back to the previous question. What is really extraordinary about this group of artists, in particular Martha and Honeywell, is that they used the emerging technologies to manage their own careers, and were really known primarily also for their artwork, in addition to sort of the setting in which they performed their work in front of an audience, which, as Laurel said, changed afterwards, and you can see that happen in the work. But the performative aspect was really our language.
Yeah, and I just to add to that, I think that is true for Honeywell and Rogers. I will say, I think Nellis was definitely more conscientious of, as a self proclaimed performer. So on some of his immigration documents, for example, he'll sign his profession as a comedian or as an actor. So I think that there's a more of a performance, like a self-conscious performance there. The other Honeywell and Rogers, I think, would have seen themselves more as visual artists. And then, although, of course, as Marianne suggested, right, their work is very performative. And I think that element captivated us as scholars. But I think so.
Great. Riva has a number of questions. One of the things that she's wondering about is, it seems that there's quite a bit of precedent for these artists in the history of magicians and disability. And she references Ricky Jay, who had a collection of ephemera depicting these performers. Is there any way that they could be seen as early history of adaptive devices for magicians?
Marianne, do you want to take that one?
I'm not sure I can answer that one. You?
I'm not either. No.
Yeah.
I hadn't really been aware of that. I definitely know there's a long history of this kind of performance of disability, but I did not think about it in terms of magicians. Although now I'm thinking there is another artist who we didn't feature in the work called I don't even know her first name, but it's Miss E. Hervey, and she did perform magic tricks as well as albinism on a really the whole fascinating tour of the United States in the 18 teens, and she did perform magic tricks. So I never really thought much about that until you got this question. But there may be something there. But thanks for that question. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Diana Korsanek is asking, and you've touched on this a little bit, but maybe you could talk a little bit more about how you understand audience curiosity in this era and what these performances meant to audiences.
Laurel, go for it.
Yeah. Yes, this is, I mentioned in the beginning, right? There is a huge part of sort of objectification of disability, right? Audience members came, they certainly wanted to purchase silhouettes, right? Hang on their parlor walls, put in their scrapbooks. They also saw viewing disability as a way to better understand the natural world, right? And so this is sort of a boom in not only kind of the culture of art, but also the culture of science and the culture of the body. Peel specifically, right? He's displaying in his museum, all these different fossils and bones and as well as paintings and portraiture. Honeywell and Rogers are performing in there, right? That, appeals to both Peel's, but also just customers in general, dual interests in art and the natural world. So yes, this curiosity is very much kind of geared towards both of those sort of agendas. And I will say, this is very much a sort of there's a lot of objectification of disability, right, going on, very much of sort of a gaze of the audience members looking at these artists. There is a way in which as these artists are turning a profit, there is a ways in which they're also kind of looking back and taking control of kind of the dynamics of this performance and this art. So there's like curiosity from the audience members, but there's also ways that these artists are sort of asserting creative control in their exhibitions. At least I think so.
Yeah, I would agree in that also, that in the role that they're in which they are actually also observing the patron and cutting their portrait, that relationship is there. I think also what really struck me too were their audience responses after the fact. There's that poem that girl wrote where, on hearing your name, I was afeared, but then once I met you, and that sense of just curiosity and fear in terms of entering the space and then, encountering, a grand lady, and the language that was used about her was really sort of extraordinary after the fact. And that sort of that idea of anticipation and expectation, and then having those expectations really challenged.
Yeah, I will say at Honeywell, it displayed her own silhouette on the door to her exhibitions, which she said was proof of her countenance and likewise a specimen of her work, right? So it was to ease customers' fears as they entered, but also to intrigue them, right? To pique their curiosity so that they came in and entered her door and paid their admission fee.
Yeah. And Peggy wonders if you can speak a little bit to how Honeywell managed her own business as a woman, and how unusual it was for a woman, and then as a disabled woman.
Yeah, absolutely. And she did, right? And so, there's unfortunately, there's so much more materials than I wish I had, can I have her bank account and other things, but she was very, she had her own will. She was, controlled her in immigration documents, for example, all sorts of different types of ways that she was, she purchased her own artistic supplies and really, set up advertisements in advance. So kind of control the dynamics of her business. So she kind of advertised before going to a particular city in town, and then say, 3 days out, 2 days out, oh, I'm here, and then of course she'd always say, this is the last week, and now this is really the last week of my shows, and so it's a way to drum up business. So she was a really savvy businesswoman, an entrepreneur, and really an artistic entrepreneur, as all these artists were. I always want more data, or more kind of sources, but it's so apparent reading her newspaper advertisements and seeing her tracing her travels.
We're getting close to time, but I want to just maybe get to a couple more quick questions. Lisa Baskin is asking, do you see any relationship to Matthias Buchinger or Sarah Biffen, who learned living without hands or feet?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And I think Martha and Honeywell, I know, performed with Sarah Biffen in England when she first arrived. Matthew Buchinger, I can't remember his dates, but he was a little bit earlier, if I remember correctly. But yeah, this is part of a trajectory, a theme of these artists, of artists with disabilities, kind of performing using their using this curiosity from customers to earn a career, have a career, earn a profit. And so, yes, absolutely. This is kind of a part of a larger story.
Yeah, great. And one more on, just quickly, did any of these artists teach? Diana Korsnick would like to know. Do we know this?
I don't know.
No?
Great question.
Okay. Yeah, there are really lots of great questions left. Darn. But this has been fantastic. I just put a link in, thanks to Lauren Hughes, who found the information that was being asked earlier about Moses Williams. So I stuck that in the chat. I also want to just take 2 seconds here to ask you both if there is a book that you might recommend about disability or the history of disability, because I think it's such a fascinating and topic that and more work needs to be done, clearly. And Laurel, we look forward to your book, but if you have a book that you could recommend so that we can put that links to that into the chat, that would be fantastic. Marianne, do you want to?
Sure, yeah. There was a mention earlier of Sarah Hendren, her book, What Can a Body Do? It's an excellent book. And then there's another, Bess Williamson's Accessible America, History of Design and Disability. Also a great one to look at. Great,
thank you. Laurel?
Yeah, sure. Just in terms of disability history, Kim Nielsen's A Disability History of the United States is a really accessible, well done text that sort of traces disability in the United States really from pre-colonial period to the present. And so there's a lot there, and there's also a lot of ideas for future research. In every sentence, there's so much to draw out, right? So it's a great place to go to start things off.
Perfect. Thank you. And one that I'd like to recommend that I'm actually really enjoying now is Beasts of Burden, Animal and Disability Liberation by Sonara Taylor. I think that's another one that's well worth taking the time to take a look at. Well, thank you both so much for sharing your work with us. And thank you to everyone who joined this evening. This has been a really wonderful conversation. I want to know before we sign off that 1 week from tonight, we will be hosting a second virtual program on disability. This will be a conversation with Lori Block, who is an award-winning documentary film, audio, and web producer, and also a 2-time Creative Artist Fellow here at AAS. So she will be speaking about her online Disability History Museum. The title of that program is Disability History, Tales, Trails, Trials. And you can register for that on our website. Again, that is a 1 week for tonight, again at 7 p.m. It's a free program. So take a look at that and register. And thank you all once again for being with us this evening. And thank you both for sharing your work.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thanks for those fantastic questions as well. They're excellent. Thanks.